How does Tarantino shoot CG? Hey, what the hell, man? I thought this was about Tarantino's writing. Yeah, it is. Just hang on a minute. What the hell is...
How does anyone shoot CG, given that CGI is made with computers and added to the movie after the principal photography has completed?
Because by CG, I actually mean Chekhov's gun. CG? Chekhov's gun? No?
Which is a writing technique that we'll explore further as we go.
You Brits have a weird sense of humour, man. And lose the headset, Scotty. We're not in goddamn Spaceballs, generic sci-fi comps.
This video explores how Tarantino utilises the technique by focusing on the classic Pulp Fiction, as well as showing how and why Tarantino is so good at shooting this literary gun. Before that, we'll dive into what Tarantino's writing is typically applauded for in order to distinguish it. And we'll look at some case studies from the auteur's work in order to show how Tarantino uses this principle to great effect.
Okay, so...
what makes Tarantino's writing work so well? Is it this?
They call it Royale with cheese.
Royale with cheese.
Or this?
Don't you hate that?
Hey, what?
Uncomfortable silences.
Or that?
If you're all right, then say something.
Something.
Most folks equate Tarantino's films, and so writing, with a kind of verbose, almost theatrical dialogue style. In other words, characters talking to each other without primarily conveying important information or pushing the plot forward, basically saying cool shit to each other. A bit like this.
Yeah, that's just legal, man, right?
That's legal, but it ain't 100% legal. I mean, you just can't walk into a restaurant, roll the joint, and start puffing away.
Or this.
I'm gonna go to the bathroom and powder my nose. You sit here and think of something to say.
Or this.
Blessed is he who in the name of charity and goodwill shepherds the weak through the valley of darkness.
What this video focuses on is the other side of Tarantino's writing, the opposite to the phatic, nonchalant, throwaway, cool dialogue stuff. And that is exposition. Not explosions. Exposition is broadly a storytelling device that delivers important information to the audience, which also includes the principle of Chekhov's gun. The concept was conceived and popularised by Russian playwright Anton Chekhov, who frequently highlighted the principle by using a gun or rifle as an example of an essential element within a story. In 1889, he wrote, "One must not put a loaded rifle on the stage if no one is thinking of firing it, because a rifle, or gun, is an attention-grabbing significant element that elicits a certain expectation, i.e. going off. And so, its presence as a prop on stage becomes a promise to the audience." He's not sadistically suggesting the reckless use of real items, real guns, as props on stage. Rather, he's using stage as a metaphor for story, and saying that everything included in a story must have a reason for being there. Otherwise, don't include it, or put it on stage. It's a writing principle that Chekhov outlined to other fellow writers in order to help them with their writing craft. The principle stipulates that everything within a story should be relevant and not superfluous. Or as Encyclopedia Britannica puts it, every element introduced in a story should be necessary to the plot. Basically about when something is set up and then paid off later in the story.
Or, as narrative theorist Robert McKee writes in his seminal book Story, to set up means to layer in knowledge. To pay off means to close the gap by delivering that knowledge to the audience.
You follow? Good.
For example,
How did my father die?
A young Jedi named Darth Vader. He betrayed and murdered your father.
I am your father.
This can come in loads of different forms, from callbacks to twists to foreshadowing. Basically, it's those moments.
otherwise known as insight. As film scholar Todd Berliner writes in his article Expect the Expected, Aesthetics of Planting and Payoff, cognitive research on insight provides additional support for the notion that people enjoy deviation from expectation, provided they can resolve the incongruity. Insight refers to the aha moment when someone suddenly grasps a solution to a mental problem. With insight, a solution pops into consciousness as we understand the relationships among elements in a new way or break free of unwarranted assumptions. Scientific evidence, including evidence from neural activity, testifies to the joy, satisfaction, satisfaction and other positive emotions that attend insight.
When the climax has a satisfying callback to something seeded earlier in the story without us realising. A payoff that makes you go, of course. A reveal that has been planted early.
Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!
Alright, but you get the idea. The reason I'm making this video is because I don't think Tarantino gets his just deserves. Kudos, credit, props, big clicks. Doesn't get the bumps. Well, he does.
Shut up! Shut the fuck up!
Basically, I don't think Tarantino gets the credit for this aspect of his writing. So to get used to the idea of Chekhov's gun, we can think about it as similar to no smoke without fire. Okay, well, usually. It's basically setup and payoff, and the type Tarantino uses is surreptitious, which is hailed as good expositional writing technique. It's thought that the audience don't want to just be force-fed information, and so it's considered better practice to covertly slip it into the narrative. Let's take a look at his use of the Chekhov's gun principle in the classic Pulp Fiction.
Thank you.
This is a heavily stylised montage, something Tarantino utilises sparingly, perhaps once per film. Here, the film seemingly glorifies and fetishises Vincent Vega's heroin-taking ritual, presenting it as almost spiritual, beautifully hedonistic and coolly nihilistic. And that seems to be its function. It is visually and aurally moody and gorgeous enough for us to enjoy it, and risque enough to hold our attention. It is quite a graphic depiction of a dangerous activity after all, and so for us to revel in Vincent Vega's self-destructive hedonistic violence with him. The sequence can be thought of as intoxicating us with its seductive, gently disorienting techniques and styles. The techniques used to achieve this are rear projection, which was used in more analogue filmmaking days, which here conveys a purposeful sense of artifice, slow motion, low-key lighting, fade-ins and outs, cross-dissolve transitions, almost as if we are in and out of consciousness. Macro photography yielding very shallow depth of field, making the surrounding areas blurry with bokeh, suggesting the kind of bleary-eyed vision when inebriated, all to convey a sense of stylisation rather than realism. The scene's like going on a drugs trip with Vincent Vega, which, given the dialogue about Amsterdam earlier, we're led to believe is an amazing experience, which we now get to have here vicariously with him. Perhaps another reason why Vincent is taking this heroin in the car is because he's on his way to pick up the boss's wife, who he has been tasked at taking out whilst his boss is away, which makes him very nervous, as it could be construed as a date. A situation which has led to him tempering his nerves with the drugs. And so the scene works on its own terms, and although all these elements have been rendered with various production techniques during filming, it starts with the writing, which has the more covert and arguably real purpose of this scene at its core, which we'll come back to shortly. He takes Mia out for dinner. We have the Jackrabbit Slim scene in which Mia insists that he dance.
Now, who will be our first contestants?
Right here. Want to dance? No. I do believe Marcellus, my husband, your boss, told you to take me out and do whatever I wanted. And now I want to dance. I want to win. I want that trophy. So dance good.
All right.
Let's hear it for our first contestant. But when the sun went down, the rapid tempo of the...
They win the trophy,
C'est la vie, c'est the...
and they return home.
You never can tell.
Here, Vincent struggles to decide how to behave appropriately, becoming more and more nervous, and Mia dancing in the living room heightens this anxiety because Vincent will be aware that she is inebriated and in a fun-loving mood, and therefore behaviour might be sailing close to the mark, a mark which he doesn't want to step beyond, because he's aware of the consequences, namely from his psychotic gangster boss. And now, the boss's wife, Vincent Vega's forbidden fruit, has offered him a drink and the prospect of the night continuing. And so Vincent Vega is faced with a dilemma. Should he stay or should he go? Meanwhile, Mia Wallace dances with careless abandon, waiting for him to return from the bathroom to have his drink and perhaps something else. This calls to mind our first Chekhov's gun, which was loaded, that is to say set up, earlier.
You remember Antoine Rockamora? Half black, half Samoan. Used to call him Tony Rocky Horror.
Yeah, maybe fat, right?
I wouldn't go so far as to call the brother fat. I mean, he got a weight problem. What's the nigga gonna do? He's Samoan.
Yeah, I think I know what you mean. What about him?
Well, Marcellus fucked him up good. Word around the campfire is it was on account of Marcellus Wallace's wife.
So what'd he do, fucker?
No, nothing that bad.
Well, then what then?
Gave her a foot massage.
Foot massage. That's it?
Mm-hmm.
Then what'd Marcellus do?
Sent a couple of cats over to his place. They took him out on his patio, threw his ass over the balcony. Nigga fell false stories. Why are you so interested in big man's wife?
Well, he's going out of town in Florida, and he asked me if I'd take care of her while he's gone.
Take care of her?
No, man. Just take her out, you know. Show her a good time, make sure she don't get lonely.
You're gonna be taking Mia Wallace out on a date?
It is not a date.
And so we understand perfectly Vincent's dilemma here, because he's fallen for Mia. If he stays, he risks incurring the wrath of Marcellus, whereas if he goes, he risks insulting Mia Wallace. He's also a hedonist, and so is a slave to his desires, which at this moment include partying with, and in other circumstances hooking up with, Mia, as they both clearly have great chemistry and are finding that this faux date is actually turning into a real one, however dangerous that may be. Due to the exposition that was delivered to us earlier in the story, we are now primed to experience this tension in the scene without having to be explicitly told this information. This is an example of good exposition and a good use of the principle of Chekhov's gun. It was loaded before, set up, and now it has gone off, payoff, in metaphorical terms. The payoff here being the tense scene that we find ourselves in. But like in any great script, just when the scene comes to a close and Vincent has made his decision to leave,
Walk out the door, get in the car, go home, jerk off, and that's all you're gonna do.
the situation escalates. And now, before we get any resolution of the current dilemma, the current Chekhov's gun, a different and bigger Chekhov's gun goes off. Perhaps now on the scale of a metaphorical rifle. Okay, let's do a stock take of the arsenal. Now this scene actually has two Chekhov's guns, or at least two sets of ammo in the same rifle. To explain this new Chekhov's gun, what's happening is Mia, waiting for Vincent to finish in the bathroom, found his stash of heroin in his coat pocket, the coat that she was wearing whilst she was dancing. Presuming this heroin to be cocaine, she cut a line and snorted it. But why did she presume it was cocaine? Because earlier in the Jack Rabbit Slims date, Mia excuses herself to go and
powder my nose,
which we assume she means take cocaine. And this was all seeded earlier at the start of this chapter, Vincent and Marcellus Wallace's wife, where criminal hitman Vincent Vega goes to buy some drugs from his local dealer. The dealer, Lance, explains the prices and the markup on a particularly hot brand of heroin. Vincent says,
Remember, I just got back from Amsterdam.
Which technically fires a Chekhov's gun that was loaded earlier that we thought was simply throwaway dialogue but now serves a function to establish that Vincent's character is a drugs aficionado. But the purpose of this scene is to set up the entire Chekhov's gun that we're exploring at the moment. The setup being that Vincent is purchasing heroin. Lance explains to Vincent that coke is
It's fucking dead as dead.
And that heroin is
It's coming back in a big fucking way.
And so, the setup of this Chekhov's gun is the information that Vincent is buying heroin, rather than the more widespread and popular at the time cocaine. What follows is a montage of Vincent Vega driving to pick up Mia. When we first experienced this scene, its effect was as described to give us a kind of vicarious drug trip with Vincent Vega. But now its hidden function becomes apparent as we replay the scene in our own heads in order to inform the scene that we're watching at the moment, even if that replay and contextualization is subconscious. Setups must be handled with great care. They must be planted in such a way that when the audience first sees them, they have one meaning, but with a rush of insight, they take on a second, more important meaning. and that secondary covert function, which was to show us that Vincent Vega is taking this drug, heroin, intravenously. Very explicitly illustrated with extreme close-ups, showing the needle pulling the blood into the liquid and then injecting the liquid back into the bloodstream. This piece of visual exposition from Vincent Vega's car ride, coupled with Mia Wallace's exposition showing her snorting some kind of amphetamine in the bathroom at Jack Rabbit Slim's, these two expositional earlier seeded scenes together illustrates clearly how these two different drugs are taken in completely different ways. And notice that these scenes, the most effective of the Chekhov's gun setup, are dialogueless. However, they are still written, just written with visual. And so, even if we don't know anything about drugs, we have been primed with these visual examples to understand that when Mia takes the drugs out of Vincent's coat pocket and snorts it, we understand intuitively, even subconsciously perhaps, that it was the wrong ingestion method for that drug, and therefore Mia overdoses. Notwithstanding all the technical inaccuracies or artistic licenses taken with this depicted reaction or overdose, reactions to heroin sniffed may differ considerably from that depicted here. Victims overdosing on heroin often turn blue because the respiratory and blood circulatory system shuts down. But all of those realistic technicalities aside, the biggest mistake by taking the heroin in this way is perhaps the amount of heroin Mia would need to cut up to snort a line compared to the amount of heroin one would usually use in order to have a measured high. That is to say, if Mia thought this heroin was cocaine, she would snort way too much of it. We still understand at this point that there are two different drugs, typically taken two different ways with differing amounts, and on this occasion, Mia has mixed those up and now is suffering the consequences of a potentially fatal OD or reaction. Chekhov's gun, in this case, being the heroin that Vincent purchases from his drug dealer Lance, the heroin, syringe, drug-taking car trip with Vincent Vega, and the cocaine or amphetamine snorting scene in the toilet at Jack Rabbit Slim's with Mia. And both these guns go off as Mia incorrectly snorts Vincent's heroin. And so, if we look at our Chekhov's gun target sheet, we see that the scene where Vincent scores his heroin from Lance is the setup, telling us very explicitly through dialogue that this is not cocaine because cocaine is out of fashion, this is heroin, which is coming back in fashion. And although this is the initial setup, it is somewhat clunky and dialogue based, which doesn't always lodge itself in the audience's memory as much as a visceral and visual scene. And so, next we have the reminder, which is the scene of Vincent taking the heroin in his car, explicitly illustrating with graphic detail the process of injecting the heroin. Then we have a second reminder, as this gun kind of has two sides to it, two barrels, if you like, in which Mia snorts some cocaine in the bathroom after explicitly saying, "I'm going to powder my nose," thereby making it a kind of witticism, followed by a stylishly staged shot, which lodges the idea more firmly in our heads. And finally, we have the payoff, where Mia takes the heroin out of Vincent's jacket and ill-advisedly snorts it instead of injecting it. The payoff being a tragedy, but nonetheless a dramatically satisfying climax. We could also consider this payoff and setup structure as loading the gun, aiming the gun, and then shooting the gun. Firstly, this entire Chekhov's gun is for the benefit of members of the audience that aren't familiar with the intricate differences of different drugs and how they are taken. The secondary benefit of setting up the payoff in this way is that astute viewers will notice the tension building as Mia takes out the heroin out of the jacket and starts cutting up a line. Viewers starting to get nervous, thinking that is the incorrect way to take this. All the time, Vincent is procrastinating in the bathroom, heightening the tension, because if he were to come out, he could see what she was doing and intervene. But we watch him taking his time and Mia incorrectly cutting up the heroin in order to dangerously snort it. And so this scene has multiple guns at play, having been seeded earlier throughout the film, all going off at various points, creating a crescendo of climaxes.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Oh, fuck me. Fuck
If this scene had occurred without these two setups, perhaps it would have been more confusing for members of the audience that aren't familiar with the intricate differences of different drugs and how they are taken.
Don't fucking die on me, Mia!
But there's also something else going on here, namely the pleasure derived from this satisfying narrative payoff. However tragic it is to see Mia OD, we are nonetheless experiencing a kind of narrative pleasure at the culmination of planted elements that are closing the loop on ambiguities, puzzles, or questions of the relevance of depicted events. Berliner outlines the wealth of psychological and narratological research finding that pleasure is derived in this way in a kind of bell-shaped curve, specifically a Wundt curve. In other words, audiences experience pleasure from increasing complexity in a narrative so long as it is cognitively manageable. And at a certain maximal level, overwhelm sets in and interest and pleasure drop off if ambiguity is prolonged too far, probably where David Lynch loses his detractors. A plant adds challenge to a narrative by preventing understanding at the same time that it offers the prospect of understanding. If a story is too challenging, then spectators will give up, unable or unwilling to sustain the search. If a story is not challenging enough, however, then spectators are liable to grow bored and tune out. The key to successful planting is finding the optimal level of cognitive challenge for the storyteller's intended audience. Or, as art historian E.H. Gombrich writes, "Delight lies somewhere between boredom and confusion." Take one goddamn guess where I am on that scale.
It could even be loosely argued that this scene follows the Chekhov's gun principle, inasmuch as we now have a new problem, a new dilemma to solve. With Mia overdosing, the question is, will she survive? Will Vincent Vega save her? Will she die?
This fucked up bitch is Marcellus Wallace's wife. Do you know who Marcellus Wallace is? Yeah. Do you? Yeah. Well, if she croaks on me, I'm a fucking grease spot. Now look, I will be forced to tell him that you did not help and that you let her die in your fucking lawn. Now come on, help me.
How is this problem going to be resolved? And this is another promise to the audience, which is another type of Chekhov's gun.
Fuck out of my way.
Because we see Mia in an overdosed, almost dead state, and we await her fate to see if she lives or dies. And of course, we come full circle back to where we started, a la Dan Harmon's story circle, as all the characters converge and help each other in a dramatic climax. And so we go through the scene, we build the tension, we dramatically explore the problem.
Press down on the plunger.
Okay, then what happens?
I'm kind of curious about that myself.
This ain't no fucking joke, man. I'm not gonna kill her.
No, she's supposed to come out of it like that. It's...
All right, count to 3.
All right, ready? 1.
And then we arrive at the crescendo, the climax of the scene, which presents us with the solution whichever way it goes.
2.
And so this climax of the scene is a type of Chekhov's gun going on, although we are now in the weeds of general dramatic scene and story structure.
3!
Which is an element of Chekhov's gun.
As we're noticing by now, this device, along with its satellites, are found everywhere in most stories. And the likely reason for this pervasiveness is, according to film scholar Todd Berliner, in an article about the neuroscientific and psychological effects of this phenomena, he writes, "By recruiting the human tendency to prepare mentally for future events, storytellers employ the device to choreograph our expectations and enhance an artwork's aesthetic value." And where does the tendency to anticipate the future come from, and what is its function?
I was kind of always frustrated by the books that existed because although a lot of them say, there has to be an inciting incident on page 27, none of them say why.
Is to extract information from past and present events in order to prepare and respond more effectively to future ones. Prediction is not just one of the things your brain does, it's the primary thing. The cortex is an organ of prediction. In other words, according to Todd and swathes of research, evidence and theory in the scientific and aesthetic fields, the Chekhov's gun setup and payoff storytelling device is likely effective because it taps into our innate psychology and lived reality, specifically our relationship with the future.
When the film delivers the setup, the viewer is thinking about the solution, outcome or relevance of the future. They're predicting, and when the payoff is delivered, the viewer recalls the setup and so is experiencing the now whilst whilst also replaying the past events, recontextualising it through the gaze of this new information, and either the current payoff moment given new meaning to the setup moment, or vice versa, or both. In other words, the viewer is in a constant state of a kind of cognitive time travel, as the meaning of the story emerges between the connected points of the time-based event. The story really lives across all the time of the text or plot, as the viewer builds up a kind of spherically timed picture of the whole as they go, constantly holding various parts of the whole in their memory and predicting the next. Interestingly, this still happens on repeated viewings or readings of stories, and we're not quite sure why.
Can you roll me one of those, cowboy? You can have this one, cowgirl.
You can't smoke in here. I don't smoke. We don't smoke. All right. Okay, please get out. You're overcomplicating this essay, okay? This is about relevant narrative elements, and here you are introducing a new setup that I have to now figure out a way to square this circle. I mean, right, okay. Jeez. Don't be such a... You'll figure it out.
Stories are the original algorithms that hack our brains as storytellers manipulate us. Or, put more positively, narrative is so powerful for us because it's how we already experience and make sense of our time-based reality. Thinking beyond mere passively existing in and reacting to the present and considering our reality in the moments in time to come. As renowned cognitive scientist and linguist Mark Turner puts it, narrative imagining, story, is the fundamental instrument of thought. Rational capacities depend upon it. It is our chief means of looking into the future, of predicting, of planning, and of explaining. It is a literary capacity indispensable to human cognition. But important to caveat here that this is just the vague, ephemeral scientific consensus around this interdisciplinary area, which, as history shows, is always prone to change. But this is the current state of knowledge in this area. As Andrea Bubik, celebrated cognitive psychologist et al., writes in their article Prediction, Cognition and the Brain, different times bring different research areas to the front and drive the field for a certain period of time. Such knowledge in fashion typically fundamentally changes the way we conceptualize cognitive and neural processing by opening new paradigms. A full reference bibliography is available in the description below if you want to dive further into these areas of neuroscience, psychology, phenomenology, film, narratology and aesthetics, and how this interdisciplinary area is at the cutting edge of perception, consciousness studies and so-called AI research. And please check them out, they're really interesting articles. And even me giving you this note now is testament to how vital time is to our understanding and experience, as presumably my change of clothes are now and have been quite jarring for you, as it conflicts with the experience of watching this video in linear real time, whereas your experience of the world tells you that this change of clothes in that short of time is impossible. And so you rightly infer the passage of time hidden in the recording, which has a stilting effect as the video presents a continuous unbroken thought. And so there is a kind of cognitive dissonance there, which is why presenters often wear the same clothes in bona fide TV documentaries and shows, as they are, when you logically consider the pragmatics of the production, often filmed sometimes days apart. And so they're artificially changing into the same costume on different days to give the illusion that the video is somehow taking place in some kind of odd linearity, to give the illusion of time coherence and continuity which more matches what you are seeing and experiencing watching the linear video. Fascinating. How about we get back to the movie now?
There are many other Chekhov's guns in Pulp Fiction, as each main story has big overarching ones, small ones, like this showdown between Vincent Vega and Butch, where the two stories collide. The Chekhov's gun is loaded or set up earlier as we see them briefly cross paths and stand off to each other in Marcellus Wallace's bar. We get the sense that a score is yet to be settled here.
You looking at something, friend? You ain't my friend, Palooka. What's that? I think you heard me just fine, Punchy.
Some Vegas in the house? My nigga, get your ass over here.
And as it describes in the script.
So,
Sorry.
don't worry about it.
Pack of red apples. $1.40.
And then later on, when Butch returns home to retrieve his grandfather's watch, he suddenly sees the gun
which Vincent Vega has left there, probably because of his drug-addled absent-mindedness, the film seems to suggest.
This aspect of the character will also end up foreshadowing Vincent Vega's death as a kind of pathos. This acts as a comeuppance for what Tarantino obviously views as a weak character trait of being a layabout, bum, pothead weed smoker, as he depicts in his other films.
Which then gives us a satisfying climax as Butch dispatches Vincent Vega. As Vincent Vega gets his comeuppance from Butch, who is acting somewhat in self-defence, although perhaps fulfilling a vendetta from earlier. We also have a mini Chekhov's gun that is completely contained within the scene. The purpose of the scene is for Butch to come into the apartment and notice that the gun has been left on the side. But rather than simply have that, Tarantino ingeniously has Butch relax and make a snack in his apartment before he leaves. Only then to notice the gun, which then leads to the standoff between himself and Vincent Vega, at which point we've forgotten about the snack, the toasty pastries, and it's then the toasties jumping out of the toaster that pushes Butch to pull the trigger. A neat little Chekhov's gun setup and payoff, within a larger Chekhov's gun setup and payoff. And Vincent's demise is set up by his frequent tendency towards toilet dwelling.
I'm gonna take a shit.
Here and in Mia's place. What makes this Chekhov's gun so effective and engaging, as with all of Tarantino's, is that he makes it seem like natural character work.
We should have shotguns.
So that means it could be up to 5 guys up there?
It's possible.
We should have fucking shotguns.
Now, as a writer, you do actually need to explain a few things. Part of my plan, my method, is to bury it in so much minutia about nothing that you don't realize you're being told an important plot point until it becomes important.
As if these narrative devices are just emerging from the character's natural behaviour. Apropos Vincent being afraid to face up to reality, hence all the drugs and the reluctance to acknowledge Jools' miracle. So he's stuck in his tunnel vision, blind, unenlightened ways. Unable to open his eyes, cowering in toilets, vice and inebriation, unable to grow as a character, and eventually gets his comeuppance because of these character flaws, when he dies at the hands of someone he was a needless asshole to.
My name's Paul. This shit's between y'all.
What'd you fucking ask me about it for? Asshole.
Therefore, reaping what he sowed in terms of his own character weaknesses, in a moral, narratological sense. And so this scene actually has 3 Chekhov's guns going off, all loaded at different times throughout the film, culminating, being paid off in this climactic showdown scene. And let's not forget this film is a moral tale, seeing as how it centres around Jools and his almost religious epiphany.
Ezekiel 25:17.
Here, the Bible quote is a callback to the apartment shooting when Jools was his old self, before he started his transformation that every major character should have in a functional story, according to many narratologists, going back to Aristotle.
The path of the righteous man is beset on all sides by the inequities of the selfish and the tyranny of evil men.
And this Bible passage is then recited by Jools towards the end of the film, when it signifies that Jools has gone through a transformation, because of course he recites the passage in a very different way now, as he has grown as a character, as he understands the passage in a different way.
To poison and destroy my brothers.
And you will know I am the Lord when I lay my vengeance upon you.
This is this Chekhov's gun going off.
I've been saying that shit for years.
As we almost expect Jools to have this moral dilemma, having recited such a morally heavy passage before he murders someone. He now views this passage from his new enlightened perspective, after having an epiphany from the miracle of the gunman missing them, and interrogates it with his new worldview, thereby using the Chekhov's gun principle in order to reveal the climax of the character journey, which many writers and theorists argue is the most important aspect of storytelling. Finishing with this new revelation of a promise to turn a new leaf, to become a better person. And so we end on a Chekhov's gun that surprisingly reveals the unlikely transformation of sinner into saint. Or, in his words,
Then, basically, I'm just gonna walk the earth.
What you mean, walk the earth?
You know, like Caine in Kung Fu.
And there are a series of smaller Chekhov's guns in the guise of neat callbacks. For example, this scene.
Yes, you did, Brett. You tried to And Marcellus Wallace don't like to be fucked by anybody except Mrs. Wallace.
Which then links to this scene, presenting it with a cruel sense of irony. And whatever the final reading is of all of this, these elements are laid throughout the story, all linked with Aristotle's internal logic, setup and payoff, comeuppance, pathos, basically a kind of narrative, logical, self-referential relevancy, which in the end are all examples and elements of the same thing, which all can be encapsulated and described to be part of or alongside the Chekhov's gun principle. And there's loads more Chekhov's guns all throughout the film, but as Tarantino might write, what's the biggest mother-flipping gun in the whole thing?
Oh, mother-flipping.
I posit that it's John Travolta. No, not Vincent Vega. John Travolta, the actor himself. You see, casting John Travolta as Vincent Vega is a masterstroke of meta Chekhov's gun usage. A huge magnum of a Chekhov's gun.
That's a fine theory.
Let me explain. Coming to Hollywood film fame via leading roles in 1976's Carrie, and perhaps most famously Saturday Night Fever, 1977, and Grease in 1978, establishing him as also a skilled singer and dancing performer. Travolta being a hugely successful star in the 70s and 80s for his dance films, since falling off the radar in the late 80s and 90s. Here, Tarantino ostensibly casts him against type as a hitman, which is at odds with Travolta's previous roles, and so perhaps loading a Chekhov's gun in as much as we expect to see Travolta dance, although we're not sure how in this role.
As my mum and dad attest to. What did we say about John Travolta?
Always has to have a dance in every film we see. Always, everyone, don't they?
Did they kill a Trump in the tunnel or something?
Hey?
Oh no, I'm thinking of, oh bloody hell. What was that film when they were all mad?
That was the film world, Darren.
Clockwork Orange.
Yeah.
Do you remember John Travolta dancing in Face Off? And he got Nicolas Cage's face on.
Yeah.
And he was the dad, or the other way around.
Yeah.
And he went into the daughter's room and he started dancing. Tom's going around him like, woo!
Yeah.
Yeah, just does a little jig, doesn't he? Like,
Papa's got a brand new bag.
Oh!
I'll do the jump. I'll do the swing. You get looking.
He has to incorporate a dance, but he's still in Saturday Night Fever.
Yeah. The one, I think, when he was playing the Angel Michael in the bar.
Yeah.
He dances to Chain of Fools.
Yeah.
Yeah, and all the women
He loves that.
started joining him, the guys are at the bar looking, and he's just carrying on.
Well, he was in his element in that bar, right?
Yeah. I mean, no sort of unbelievable moves, it was just the rhythm. He's got the rhythm, hasn't he?
Yeah, I guess so.
He's just still got it.
At that time when Saturday Night Fever was out, we went to Palma, Mallorca, I think it was. And all the waiters used to ask you about bloody John Travolta because it was when Saturday Night Fever was, and they all thought that was King John Travolta,
Okay.
Do you remember?
Yeah.
All of them.
But we still have that kind of expectation or question somewhere within us, asking, why? Why cast Travolta as this hitman? And then we get to Jack Rabbit's limbs, and the rest is history.
So Dad's good.
All right.
So the aim of this video is to highlight Tarantino's use of the Chekhov's gun writing principle, which can basically be thought of as setup and payoff, just as this dance scene is the payoff to the setup of casting John Travolta as Vincent Vega.
It was a teenage wedding and the old folks...
Even this video employs the Chekhov's gun setup and payoff principle of standard story theoretical structure. Remember the clips played at the beginning?
Like inconsequential, realistic chit-chat?
I would argue not. Okay, then what are they? Are they red herrings?
What the hell is a red herring, Limey?
Red herring is a term to describe a kind of misdirectional false setup that is designed to purposefully mislead the audience. And you can actually think of this concept as an anti-Chekhov's gun. I'm going to read you the stories behind the red herring phrase because I think it's pretty interesting. Skip ahead if you're not interested in the history of the phrase. If you are, relax. Why do we say red herring? A favourite term in detective stories and whodunits, a red herring refers to a deliberately misleading clue that diverts attention from the truth. And where does the phrase come from? There are actually a couple of red herrings in the historical etymology of the phrase red herring itself. Namely, throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, herring was a staple feature of the British diet. In a time before refrigerators, preserving herring involved salting and smoking. As well as giving the fish a pungent odour, the treatment turned herring a ruddy colour. This red herring, although there technically isn't a fish called the red herring once it's cooked, it's a kipper, plays a part in the world of fox hunting. There are two versions of the story. Either hunt saboteurs would drag the pongy fish along the ground to confuse the hounds and send them in the wrong direction, or the hunters themselves would use the fish to train their dogs to pick up a scent. The latter use, and the more likely story, was espoused in the 1807 article written by journalist William Cobbett. If herring being used to train hunting dogs doesn't convince you, there is another but probably apocryphal etymology. As the wealthy English clergyman Jasper Mayne was dying in 1672, he bequeathed a mysterious trunk to his servant with the promise that the contents will make him want to drink. When the servant opened the trunk, he forlornly realised that it contained nothing more than a salted herring. There you go. So in a nutshell, the phrase likely came into being because people trained their hunting dogs by using the herring to provide the dogs with a distraction to see if the dogs could overcome that distraction and still follow the prey. So it was a way of presenting a distraction that the dog, or the audience in this case, are meant to eventually ignore. It's a distraction technique designed to actually, or in our case metaphorically, throw us off the scent being a metaphor for the truth, or perhaps relevance or meaning, usually deployed in the whodunit, crime and detective genres in order to throw the audience off the scent of guessing who the culprit is, and in order to make the viewing experience more fun and gamified by upping the difficulty and surprise. There are myriad examples of this, from Agatha Christie stories to the more recent Glass Onion films. Just like a magic trick, the red herring acts as a kind of misdirection. But Tarantino's cool dialogue doesn't seem to fit into this camp either, as it seems to just be people talking in a more realistic, recreational, non-plot driven way, which was perhaps a rarity in mainstream Hollywood cinema until that point. Although there's plenty of it in British kitchen sink social realism cinema before that era. This is technically referred to as phatic communication, meaning it's inconsequential chat, more like the type used in real life, or communication that has a social function rather than an informative one, aka small talk. But really, it's the style of this phatic small talk dialogue that has earned Tarantino a place in cinema and pop culture history, as the lines exhibit particular idiomatic structures that reflect cultural and linguistic trends of the era and place, usually pre-millennial USA, although more recently featuring older period films. However, the dialogue's still seemingly stylistically anachronistically modern in these. So, are these initial examples of Tarantino's signature lines just phatic stylized dialogue? Is that their function? Well, not quite. If we look a little closer, we find that they are still small Chekhov's guns. Let me explain. Whilst this scene may seem to contain phatic small talk type dialogue, it's actually a covert Chekhov's gun, just hidden in the clothing of the film, if you like.
You know what they put on French fries in Holland instead of ketchup? Or what? Mayonnaise?
Vincent's chat about drugs and Amsterdam in the car, seemingly phatic, non-essential, throwaway, cool dialogue, existing for its own sake as a kind of style for the sake of it, is actually the loading of a Chekhov's gun that defines Vincent's story later in the film, as his entire journey is about drugs, perhaps even heroin specifically as a kind of stepping over the mark from good drugs to bad ones.
And then I found on my own a daily ex-heroin addict, and I took copious notes about how they behaved when they're on the good stuff and when they're on the bad stuff and all the differences. And I came to a happy medium about the behavior that he would have. What do I do? Because I'm not going to do heroin, so what can I do to actually feel something? He said, well, okay, if you have to, get plastered on a bunch of tequila and lay in a warm pool of water. And he said, then you'll be at the bottom of the feeling that you start to feel when you're on heroin. And I said, I could do that. I went, okay. And then the notes, I could apply, all those notes that I had from both drug addicts, I could apply to that feeling and exaggerate it when needed, because they describe beautifully the arc of a heroin high. Whether Quentin knew it or not, but he built in beautifully the arc. And he didn't, I don't even know if he knew that he had, but from the time he shoots up to the time he picks up Mia, to the time he goes to the restaurant, to the time the shocking overdose happens, that's when, by that time in any of that evening, he would have started to come down. Yeah. So that sober thing that happened to him when the needle is shot is probably the point where that heroin started to and so it worked beautifully for me. But I remember Quentin even saying, I don't know exactly what John's doing. You know, he's shuffling slowly and he's moving, he's talking slowly and he's looking around. But that was my playing the arc of the heroin.
He's a seasoned drug user, perhaps developing his habit in Amsterdam and now opting for the hardest drugs his dealer has to offer, which eventually leads to Mia overdosing, and eventually, due to his inebriation and scattiness, his own death.
Still got your Malibu?
Oh, man. You know what some fucker did the other day?
What?
Fucking keyed it.
This is serving 4 expositional functions. 1. We are visually seeing the drug deal, but they are discussing something else, which tells us this is prosaic, routine for them. They are seasoned drug connoisseurs. 2. It demonstrates a familiarity between them. Lance knows Vince well enough to know his car, and so they are more than simply dealer and customer, but trusted old friends too. 3. Vince is hot-headed and dangerous, itching for violence in an amoral way, sadistic even.
Boy, I wish I could have caught him doing it. I'd have given anything to catch that asshole doing it.
4. This is a lawless America, where the codes and morals of this criminal class have to deal with things themselves, without involving institutions such as health or police or law. 5. And this is the most salient Chekhov's gun. Vince loves his car, so that when it gets totaled later, this is a cosmically ironic comeuppance. And also demonstrates the stakes and the lengths at which he will go to get out of this situation. If this badass hot-headed hitman is willing to total his car just to get out of this situation for fear of reprisal from this gang boss, then Marcellus, the boss, must be one badass mofo. And the final one of our planted Chekhov's gun setups from the beginning of the video is just after the climax where Vince revives Mia. When Lance tries to get her to speak,
If you're alright, then say something.
which is a callback to earlier when Vince tried to get her to speak.
You know any animal jokes?
Well, I only got the chance to say one, because we only did one show.
Tell me.
Nah, you wouldn't like it, and I'd be embarrassed.
You told like 50 million people, and you can't tell me?
No, I'm definitely not going to tell you, because it's been built up too much.
This is a payoff to the setup that Mia is guarded, reticent, holding back, and is perhaps untrusting and suspicious of other people, hesitant to be too intimate and give too much away.
Says ketchup. Ketchup.
Demonstrating that she now trusts Vince enough to share this perhaps embarrassing part of her history with him, and also as a way of thanking him by divulging this juicy tidbit that he wanted to know during the date. But arguably the most poetic and satisfying emotional character arc climax to the Vince and Mia story is this.
Don't you hate that?
Hey, what?
Uncomfortable silences. Why do we feel it's necessary to yak about bullshit in order to be comfortable?
don't know. That's a good question.
That's when you know you found somebody really special. And you can just shut the fuck up for a minute, comfortably share silence.
Well, I don't think we're quite there yet, but don't feel bad. We just met each other.
So, what's the point of this headset? And lose the headset, Scotty. Well, nothing.
It doesn't make any sense. Any fucking sense.
It's a red herring. Or, even worse, it could simply be an irrelevant piece of information or a mistaken plot hole. Example of bad exposition, clumsy writing, inept or uninformed narrative structure, basically illustrating how easy it is to get this wrong and how difficult it is to get it right. Unless it's an allusion to Tarantino's fated final film, which was going to be a new Star Trek movie which would have featured futuristic comms like this, which would have probably featured lines like,
No.
beam me up, Scott.
Shut up! Shut the fuck up! You, my friend, don't know crap about life.
So, to answer the last of our inquiries, the Chekhov's gun principle is partly what makes Tarantino's writing work so well. Although there are of course myriad elements, the setup and payoff plot structure has a bigger impact than many give credit for. Because although the style of Tarantino's dialogue is famous and likely instrumental in his success, the structure of his writing is, although lesser acknowledged, also intrinsic to the work's success. As the founder of narrative theory, the 2,000-year-old Greek philosopher Aristotle puts it, but most important of all is the structure of the incidents. Character determines people's qualities, but it is by their actions that they are happy or the reverse. So that's how Tarantino shoots Chekhov's gun in Pulp Fiction. Tarantino loves using guns in his work, and his biggest one is this writing tool, which is arguably present in all stories and actually intrinsic to their very being. Thanks for raiding Tarantino's arsenal with me. I'm currently taking stock of other films in his armoury using this methodology, as well as applying this analytical framework to other filmmakers. And if you enjoyed it, please press the like button, as apparently it all helps.
And if you join my Patreon and become a member, then you get access to all behind the scenes stuff, goodies, processes, scripts, all that kind of stuff, which I'll be regularly contributing to.
And finally, over to you. I'd like to know what your favourite Chekhov's gun is. Seriously, write it in the comments and I'll respond to absolutely every single comment on this video, guaranteed. Even if that response is